8 Spruce Street in New York in Lower Manhattan is an exciting new building, and the winner of the Council on Tall Buildings Best Tall Building Americas for 2011. And here to talk about it are the building owner, Joe Rechichi with Forest City Ratner Companies, and two of the designers, John Bowers and Craig Webb, both with Gehry and Partners in New York. Welcome to Chicago.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're going to start out by talking on our experts panel questions, and just please jump in here and answer them as interests you. We're already talking about a 1 kilometer high building in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom Tower. It's been announced. And what do you think is the single biggest limiting factor that keeps us from building mile-high buildings?
I would say that it's most high-rise buildings are driven by economics and by the pro forma that the developers go through. And so I think that when that kind of money and situation and program come together, that'll probably happen. But I think that's from my experience in designing buildings, that's the primary driver is the economics of it and how that happens. And I imagine, I'm pretty sure that as the buildings get taller, the cost per square foot goes up kind of incrementally as you get higher. So I would imagine that's the limiting factor.
I would say from a technical aspect, the core, the structural system, all the building services to maintain a building of that size and that height will increase. And so what happens, to your point, in terms of the efficiency of the floor plates and the rest of that to support a building like that would be a really big challenge to get through.
In my view, it's unquestionably the economics of it, the feasibility of building a tall building like that. For a private developer, it would be a very hard sell. It's just the rate of return on the upfront capital to do it is just not there. I think we're almost there infrastructure-wise, and you have the challenges that John mentioned of the maintenance and the operations of a building that tall is consuming, dollar-wise consuming, but it's manageable if you get to that point. But it's the upfront capital, and certainly now with the debt financing, which there is no debt financing out there, it would just be hard-pressed to cobble up the financing that's needed to get something like that even thought about, in my opinion.
I can just imagine what you as a building owner would think about managing a mile-high building. What goes through your mind? That's got to be a huge undertaking, to say the least.
It's scary even thinking about it right here. It would be, as I said, consuming on the dollar side, but just trying to figure it out, it would take a while, I think, even just to figure out on the management side, the sequence of how you would maintain a building and manage it.
Our second question deals with carbon neutral, and sustainability, of course, is always a big theme here at the awards because so many buildings are incorporating that now. Can tall buildings ever truly become carbon neutral or approach that?
Yeah, I think that as technology develops, if you imagine the amount of energy that hits the skin of a building, both in terms of solar and wind, that I'm sure there's plenty of energy that's actually hitting the facade if it can be captured in an efficient way, coupled with daylighting, which can, artificial lighting consumes a lot of the energy that a building requires, and then figuring out natural ventilation. In the combination of all those things, plus better technology in terms of capturing wind power and solar power, I'm sure that the day will come pretty soon when that'll happen.
It will. I absolutely agree. And I think it's the technology and the economics that will kind of drive some of that. There are plenty of technologies and systems available to all of these things are out there. No one has really pooled a project together, I think, technically, from that standpoint at this point, but I think you'll see it.
From a building owner standpoint, a building that produces some of its own energy and maybe gives back to the grid, is that something that's attractive to you?
Absolutely, unquestionably. On the marketing end of it, but more importantly on the whole economic side and the environmental side, unquestionably. But I actually differ from the professionals here. I don't think a tall building will become carbon neutral. I agree that the technology, it just gets better every day, and it'll get very close. But I just can't see it ever becoming completely carbon neutral.
Your building is in Lower Manhattan. It's a neighbor to the One World Trade Center building and the World Trade Center site. And now we're 10 years down the road from 9/11, and probably no one at this gathering has been hit more directly by that event than you have, just by virtue of your location. How much safer are we now, 10 years down the road? What have we learned in the last 10 years as far as making buildings safe?
I think that's a really complicated question. We actually have been working on a project for Performing Arts Center on the World Trade Center site for more than 5 years already, and it's a project that is looking for funding. It's not underway currently, but it's out there in the future. And the issue there was to try and achieve a balance. It's a performing arts center, probably for the Joyce Theater, which is a dance presenter. A lot of what they wanted to do was engage community. They wanted to put rehearsal rooms on the ground floor. They wanted a lot of transparency. And in that context, how do you maintain the kind of artistic freedom, the connection to the community, the transparency of the building, and maintain the safety? In the long run, the conclusion was that it's, in a democratic society, it's not worth giving up that kind of openness engagement in order to create a building that becomes a bunker, like the big towers down there, which have 10 stories of solid concrete at their bases, do kind of the opposite in their body language. They don't encourage people to enter them. They become fortress-like, and I think my feeling is that's giving up too much. We designed a building in Jerusalem, and the same issues were there, and in the long run, I think that by creating a fortress out of a building, you're basically giving up your freedom to the terrorists, and it's not something that I would support.
I think technically, from the code's standpoints in changing, that there have been improvements made, but there are results that come about from that. I think maybe from a bigger picture standpoint, we as a society have changed a little bit and a little bit more aware of essentially how things operate. I mean, coming and being part of New York and seeing things in transitions, how the government, the police, how everything kind of operates now, much different than it was pre-9/11, in my opinion. I think from that standpoint, that already plays a role in making things safer, not just technically with the building.
That is a complicated question, and it certainly, hits home with me, living where I live, and having experienced it. I think we learned through the unfortunate event of that day. So are the egress issues, core issues, via best practices, are being incorporated in new super tall buildings, in new tall buildings and skyscrapers. I agree 100% with Craig that we shouldn't be giving in to a bunker mentality, taking his words, which they are very accurate, a bunker mentality, because we can build anything to anything. But why would we give in to a bunker mentality and take away what the United States represents, which is a democratic society?
Were there any 9/11 sensibilities because you are in the neighborhood? I guess it's probably enough time has gone by to where our thought process has accommodated this now. Is it just part of the scenery, part of the way we're doing business now? What's changed?
Well, I think human nature, time heals all, or time helps forget a lot. So as far as being 10 years outside of it, we kind of forgot what we went through. However, our building, in the early stages, 2005, 2006, I was in front of the public and Community Board 1, which is the local entity down that represents Lower Manhattan. And I had to speak to the people that were there, and I was there myself. And no, we were very sensitive to it. We were sensitive to it. But I think it goes back again to what Craig says, is that we have to move on and do what we know best in society, and maintain, our roots as a democratic society, and not change what we do because of some radical few in this world.
Moving on to our last question, our experts panel question, and you can opine on this as suits you. What do you think is the best tall building in existence today, one that your firm has not designed, and why? And what is it about that particular building that captures your imagination?
On that issue, I would agree with Adrian Smith. The Hancock Tower, for me, is my favorite tall building in the world, and it's. I guess there are a number of factors. One, just the strength, the shape, the tapering of the tower is an incredibly beautiful form. It does a lot of things visually that, the kind of forced perspective that looking up from the ground, and the tapering of the tower accentuates the height. But I think it's mostly just the simplicity of the idea of that is so strong. It's just, as a part of the skyline, it's very distinctive. I mean, it means, it's part of what this city's image is to the world. That tower is the Chicago skyline for me. The two towers, the Sears Tower and Hancock are what create the iconic image of Chicago. And for me, that one's the better of the two.
I would agree. The difference for me is I don't really have one favorite. I probably go by city more so than just one. It's complicated too in terms of its context, how the building meets the ground and the sky. I think that's how I kind of view it. But I have to agree, for Chicago it would be the Hancock Tower.
For New York?
New York, I'm partial to me, so I would say probably Seagram Building.
Joe?
Empire State Building.
Always.
Yeah, very partial to it, being from New York, what it represents, when it was built, why it was built, how it was built, and how it's still there. And I'm not sure if it's the name, but and the building itself, the tower and the name, are perfect for each other. It always will be, except for maybe Beekman or 8 Spruce Street project. It always will be probably my favorite building.
And that raises a question that I've been wanting to ask somebody with the events of 9/11 and kind of the reemergence of the Empire State Building as New York's tallest. Has there been a kind of rethinking, a reemergence of that building's identity in New York?
I don't think it ever lost its identity. The Empire State Building will always be the Empire State Building. The observation deck is crowded no matter what, no matter when, only when they shut it after the terrorist attacks. It's just something about it that it's withstood the test of time and the test of events. So I don't really think it had to reshape itself or anything like that.
Let's talk about 8 Spruce Street. A very bold statement, to say the least. And it is a very bold statement. It's such a striking building. How easy was it to build such a game changer of sorts where you did, and what was the process of getting there from concept to the final product?
Well, I'll take the initial part, being the construction executive. The logistics in Lower Manhattan are enormously difficult. These streets are very narrow. They're not conducive to building skyscrapers, even though you see the World Trade Center towers and things of that nature. Logistics were very, very, very difficult. The complications of the building itself were enormous on their own. And then we had this magnificent curtain wall, which lended some additional complications. I think Bruce Ratner, who's the owner of Forest City Ratner Companies, he didn't hedge at all. He wanted Frank Gehry from day one. He believed in his work, believes in his vision, and believed that this building and what we wanted to do was it was important to have him be a part of it. And I think that was visionary on his part.
But such a bold statement, is it easy to build such a bold building in Manhattan?
I think when you look back at it, we had some tough times, but I think overall it was pretty simple. After we were able to kind of educate everybody through the design process, the contract document process, advancing the level of information up front, clearing up the question marks, demonstrating a process that this is all achievable through many mock-ups, different exercises that we went through to essentially prove out the process. Once that was kind of settled, it boiled down to the execution, and the execution of the project in the field was, to me, it was amazing. I mean, it's more than just an exterior wall project. We did the units, and that actually took more time for us than the wall in some cases. But the actual execution in the field, I thought was very smooth in terms of the sequence and the schedule with the concrete, every floor essentially being different, the perimeter and the slab edge that laced into the embeds for the curtain wall to support that, everyone being slightly different, went incredibly smooth. I think I said upstairs that we had essentially 19 RFIs from permis lease on the wall. It's 427,000 square feet of curtain wall. In terms of the schedule and the construction schedule, you can elaborate on that, but in terms of all of that process, and even down to, I think, the budget that we were able to stick and design on budget.
And some of the programmatic changes, for instance, when the school came on board, it complicated the structure enormously. We had to maintain the standards of open classrooms and the structural columns going through a normal classroom, let alone an auditorium or a gymnasium. So the programmatic changes that we fought through huge economic issues. At one point, we did pause the job, and we were seriously considering just lopping it off halfway up. Luckily, we didn't do that, but we fought our way through that. We managed our way through that. We didn't close our eyes. We actually did what we had to do in order to make it work on a fiscal basis.
Did the nature, sorry, go ahead.
I think in terms of, you're talking about the architectural statement, perhaps, and in the design process, as John showed earlier, we went through, which is a normal in our process, to look at a lot of different iterations. Probably 50, 60, 70 models we went through, and in our practice, a lot of the buildings that we've done in the past have been much more sculptural than this building in terms of the kind of big scale design. And in the process, we looked at a lot of much more radical shapes than the one that we ended up with. Towers that were twisting, curvilinear, much more curvilinear shapes at a much bigger scale. And I recall, the breakthrough that Frank made in the design process, which shocked me really, was that while staying in New York, he was looking at all the kind of iconic skyscrapers in New York. And his kind of breakthrough moment was that he said all those towers have straight corners on them. They're all very vertical and straight, and that the stability of the form, which somewhat has to do with the thinking of the occupants of the building. How are they going to feel about being in the building? How are they going to feel about being in a building that's very sculptural and curvilinear versus something that has a solidity and stability to the form? He came back to the office and straightened the corners of the towers, made it a very stable shape, and then we started working on the articulation of the skin between that. So that, I think, for me, the simplicity of that move and the kind of calming of the design into that shape was really what makes that tower really different than most of our other work. And I think it's what makes it really a good part of New York skyline.
Well, I guess the design permutations that you ran into after those corners were stabilized came from manipulating that facade, which I guess obviously had to to be done with computer design, where there's no way that you could have gotten it done without that technology. But how much manipulation was there before you found a shape that you finally settled on?
There was a lot of manipulation, both, I mean, the model that John showed that was made out of paper, which is always the way we start, was a very abstract idea. And then in bringing that into the computer, and then trying to figure out how to build it, which is a huge step for something that complex, and then starting to work with Permastelisa. We had an original 3D computer model based on the paper model that was a lot more articulated, had a lot more kind of radical shaping to it. And then in the process of trying to put the building skin on budget, which was a huge task with Permastelisa, we went into kind of rationalization phase and working with John, who was trying to make the budget pencil out, with Frank looking over our shoulders. Frank saying, "Don't lose it," which is what he says all the time to us, "Don't lose it," while you're going through this kind of rationalization process. And then trying to figure out what you're seeing in a computer model versus what the building's going to look like when you build it. And trying to understand that the kind of amplitude of the folds, what was that going to look like in reality? Because I think the biggest fold that comes out off the facade is something like 7 or 8 feet. In the original model, we had folds that were coming like 15 feet off of the facade. And to try and figure out, do we really need that much shape? Is that going to benefit us, or is the building going to work something that's tighter than that? And I think Frank was a little afraid at first that we'd flatten the facade out too much, and then in looking at the realized building, we went, wow, there was plenty of movement there. More, as much as we needed.
There are so many great interior spaces in there as a result that you certainly don't get in a box-shaped building. But Joe, what did you think as you started seeing these designs coming at you? I'm sure it looked pretty radical than anything that you'd seen before. Did you like it, or did you have to be sold on it?
Well, as Craig said, I had to maintain the budget. So there was a slide upstairs that I had that said designing outside in and inside out, and at times I thought we were upside down. This is the way I looked at it. It was very radical, but we managed through it, and the vision was there, and it was solved. I used the word collaboration during the presentation. That's what it was. It was collaboration amongst all parties, and understanding how much pushback each one was really permitted to do in order to get this thing done. As Craig said, Frank didn't want to lose it. We still had a building to build within budget, which we did. In fact, we built under budget. And so there's a long answer to your question. It was radical to me, but it quickly became very believable and doable, being intimately involved with the whole process from day one. I saw it coming, and we figured it out.
What are your thoughts on some of these interior spaces? Because some of these apartments look fabulous.
They are fabulous. That is the word. They are fabulous. Frank, when he comes to the building, he likes to sit on these shaped sills. They're almost custom to him or to someone that goes to different areas within an apartment on its own. The building is doing phenomenal. It's incredibly well received, not only for the amazing and magnificent facade and architecture on the outside, but for the feeling when you're inside these units. I think we had some very nice photos, which showed very well. They photoed very well, and I use that benefiting, one benefiting the other. There's no question that this undulating curtain wall benefited the whole process of a unique unit, and it's helped us tremendously, I think, in leasing up the building.
I think one of the things that really caught my attention when I was looking at the photos is how the building meets the ground, and the brick facade at the bottom, red brick, I guess, which I suppose matches the building in with its surroundings, and that's really a very unusual combination. How did you arrive at that?
I think there was a lot of debate back and forth with Frank about what the base of the building should be. It's a public school. I think there was, for Frank, an association with kind of a brick schoolhouse, which was one of the things that led him in that direction. I think another facet is obviously the brick buildings that surround it, and we're always trying to anchor our buildings into the neighborhood. And I think if you were walking down the street and you didn't look up, you'd walk right by it and not even notice it was there, because the base is very simple. But in terms of design, the sculptural shape, we looked upon that podium as the kind of base for the sculpture. It's like a plinth for a sculptural piece, like a Brancusi or something like that. So to have that kind of solid, bound to the earth kind of podium, and then to set this very dynamic moving object on top of it, I think was really what drove that idea of putting brick on the base.
Where does tell me how a Frank Gehry, who is a designer name in tall buildings, how he puts his hand into these things and what his involvement is with this as it goes through. What is that guidance like?
I'll start and you can finish on that one. Frank is actively involved in every project in the office. He is into the details. He understands the computer models and is able to work seeing both the images coming from the computer models, from the physical models, and making that relationship and transition between the two, so as we resolve the geometries. But he is absolutely a part of it, even helping us with budgets, going through the cost of the project, providing valuable input to the whole process. I mean, he's laid this out. Essentially our process and of collaboration with the clients, with the owners, through even the construction period. I mean, this is all about Frank and his process and idea. So it's, I don't know, Craig.
Well, I've worked with Frank for, I guess, 22 years now, and we've developed a working kind of method which has very little words and a lot more drawings and very hands-on model building. There are also a lot of references. One thing we haven't talked about is the relationship of this facade to Renaissance sculpture, which is one of the things that Frank has been very focused on for his whole career. And this building in particular, the undulation of the facade is like Renaissance sculpture and fabric, and the draperies on particularly Bernini sculpture, which Frank looks at a lot, and then we look at pictures, and what that is about is trying to create a kind of fluidity and a dynamic in a fixed solid object, which is what a lot of that sculpture is about. So those kinds of things inspire the process. In terms of what goes on day to day, he draws. We build models. I work with a team of a lot of people that work with us. The reason there's 70 iterations is that we go through 2 or 3 in a day sometimes, and the work is going on right outside of his office. He makes a sketch, build a fast model. He comes out and goes, no, off, And you go through that process, and there may be something in that one, not something in that one. Let's put those two together, and so it goes on and on like that through 50, 60, 70 iterations until you hit a breakthrough point.
And this is how Frank puts his stamp on a product.
Well, it's a lot more than his stamp. It's his,
his
it's
look,
how
his...
it's how it gets out of his head and into the finished building eventually. That's how that happens.
Because you started out with just a very basic form. You knew that you had the New York setback design standard to work with. So I guess you already had a basic idea of the form of the building just based on that. And how did it go from there?
Well, we build what we call an envelope model, which is just, this is what the zoning envelope looks like for the building. On that site, the height is unlimited, so there's no top to that shape.
But we will
there
limit it by
was a lot of
the FAR.
FAR,
Right.
we will limit it by FAR.
There was a lot of back and forth with Forest City and the cost in terms of what the premium was to go higher which then generates a smaller floor plate, which then generates less efficiency, and which then drives the cost. And we looked at a lot of models that were a lot shorter, a lot more spread out, still staying within the zoning envelope. There was a pretty vigorous debate, I would say, going back and forth. At a certain point, I think that both the sculptural nature of the building and the possibility, at one point, particularly when there were condominiums, of getting the tower taller, the views that you would gain from that, getting above the surrounding buildings, which
Were the
was,
thoughts of going taller?
I think that,
Yes,
It worked.
we actually.
But as Craig described it, he described it very well. There was the skinnier, the taller for a residential building that just didn't work out. You know, we had unit mixes that we had to abide by. In other words, 35% one bedrooms or studios, 20% studios, and a minority of which is 2 and 3 bedroom units. That drove a lot of the shape of the building eventually.
The floor plate sizes
Floor plate sizes.
were driven from that.
Well, Joe, you're the owner. I'm going to let you have the last word. You're next door neighbor to One World Trade Center and the Brooklyn Bridge and the Woolworth Building. A very classy building in a very classic neighborhood, designed by one of the top designer architects in the world today. It's a new building that people are getting used to, and how are you acclimating to the neighborhood?
Oh, extremely well. It fits. It's not like taking something that doesn't belong. It absolutely belongs there. You can see it from firsthand when you're walking the building. Everyone's neck is, as they come by the building, is craned up. They are amazed at the building, and it's been extremely well received.
Well, I want to thank all of you for dropping by to talk about 8 Spruce Street in New York City, the Best Tall Building America's winner for 2011 by CTBUH.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's fascinating.